Hello everybody, and today we will be covering the killer side of the perks. As I promised yesterday, we will be covering killer perks and our general thoughts and opinions on what the perks do, where they sit in the killer rankings. We did the Survivor video yesterday, about a 2-hour slog, and we're going to be doing that again today. There are less perks for killer, so I think I can shorten this up, but you never know. I wanted to take some proper time and answer some questions. As always, this video will be in alphabetical order based off of color, so if you're not sure where the perk is, just skip ahead a little bit, and my cursor will always be on the perk that I'm currently covering. I also want to give as a side bonus, I will not be covering the Predator Hunting Grounds trial with any coverage. I want to wait till that game properly gets out of beta. I know I've seen a number of DBD streamers who have played that. They've been covering it. I am planning on getting killer perks. I will note that, like, the Survivor tier list had very few, like, meta perks, a large number of B and C tier perks, and then a little bit of D and E. Killer's gonna be a little bit more top heavy. I think there's gonna be a lot of A, B, and C, and very little of the D and E, but I don't know. I will give perks more credit than they're potentially worth, so I think that's an important thing to consider. I think I will give a perk a lot more credit in terms of if you have the requisite knowledge to use it. So with that in mind, we're going to begin this video with the Nurse's Calling, which is going to be an A meta tier perk. A Nurse's Calling is, and a lot of people just simply call it Nurse's Calling or Nurses. This is actually properly called a Nurse's Calling. This is one of the top tier perks in the game. It makes it so survivors cannot heal in your terror radius without being seen. It is an aura reveal, which means there are things that survivors can do to counter this, but this effectively lets you narrow down where a survivor is if they try and heal up and chase. It's a really hard perk for survivors to actually counter, because you're generally going to make that person the priority when you are, because you're going to see it. It can work better on stealth killers. Some survivors are smart enough to completely avoid healing in your terror radius in the first place, but it's just an excellent perk to run. It essentially lets you, if a survivor breaks chase after taking a hit, it essentially prevents them from healing in your terror radius, or even within a small vicinity of you. Now, it's intentionally designed to have a shorter terror radius than or a shorter effective range than what your terror radius is. So if your terror radius, for example, is very small, nurses will also shrink to be smaller than that. So it makes it much more difficult to use on smaller terror radius killers, but most survivors, I should say, aren't really going to heal in terror radius for fear of this perk these days. Next perk that we have is Agitation. I consider this to be a B tier perk. This is one of those perks that if you feel like the perk slot is worth it, you can run it. There's no real downside other than the actual perk take up a slot. Basically, it increases your movement speed while transporting a body by 18%. It also increases your terror radius. The two main uses for this are to make sure that survivors don't wiggle off your shoulder, or it fits well in a terror radius build based around, like, increasing your terror radius. So if you're running a Cloraphobia anti-heal, or if you're going to be running a sort of like a doctor build where you want to increase your terror radius as much as possible, you know, this works for a limited amount of time. That's not really the main benefit of this. The main benefit is that you move 18% faster. So comboing this makes basement builds a lot easier. It makes it very easy for you to get between long distant hooks. It's a good way to counter Sabo. It's a good way to counter Survive with Friends. All in all, this does its job. Next, we have Barbecue and Chili. This is another meta perk. This is a good perk to run because it has two very significant benefits. So one, it has the We're Gonna Live Forever type bonus to it, in that after you hook a survivor, you get a token, and this token will give you one token for each time that a survivor is hooked for the first time. So basically, as long as you hook all 4 survivors in the game at least once, you will double your blood points at the end of the game. So something that you would naturally want to do as a killer anyways, this perk will give you a bonus for that. It also gives you the in-game bonus, however, unlike We're Gonna Live Forever, after you hook the survivor, all other survivors' auras are revealed to you for 4 seconds when they are further than 40 meters from the hook. The design of this perk is to be an anti-camping perk. You chase a survivor, you down a survivor, you hook a survivor, you see where the other survivors are that are far away from you, and you go chase them and pressure them. This encourages the other survivors to come over and safely get and unhook. It's designed to discourage camping and tunneling, and that blood point bonus is there for it. Now, that doesn't mean that a killer is not going to camp and tunnel with this perk, but I feel it's important to mention that this perk is a good perk to run if you are trying to get more blood points and you're trying to learn how to play pressuring killers more effectively. A lot of people tell me that only killers with movement speed or mobility, like Nurse, Spirit, Billy, can take advantage of this because they're the only ones that can realistically traverse the map. That's not true. Wraith, Clown, Trapper, you know, some of your more mid to low tier killers who don't have those movement abilities still get good advantage. They get a head start of knowing where the survivor is, and it discourages camping and tunneling. Always a good thing to have. Bitter Murmur to me is actually a C tier perk. I'm not a particular fan of this perk. It does its job. I wouldn't say it's a bad perk. I just won't say it's a good perk. Basically, each time a generator is fully repaired, all survivors within 16 meters of that generator will have their auras revealed for 5 seconds, and then when the last gen is popped, all survivors' auras are revealed for 10 seconds. The disadvantage of this perk is that, considering there are a limited amount of generators in the game that need to be completed, therefore 5, and the survivor has to complete them in order for this perk to activate. And this perk basically just shows you, there they are, that's that scoundrel that be touching my gen. Yeah, boy, I'm gonna get you. That's about all that perk is really good for. It doesn't really do anything for you other than letting you know what specific survivor was on a gen or near a gen. So if you're not chasing a survivor, this lets you basically know where a survivor is going so you can chase them. I would say the downside to this is that the generator was just completed, and if you're heading over there because the generator was completed, you're already more than likely going to get into a chase with them. You don't need this perk for that. I mean, as an aura reveal, it's nice, especially if you're running Bitter Murmur and Nurses. If you're like trying to cut out distortion, I think this is a good bait perk. I don't think there's a lot of value you realistically get from this. I think it's one of the weaker aura reveals, but it's still relatively strong as an aura reveal. Blood Echo is an interesting perk for me. I do like Blood Echo. I'm going to give this a B tier nod. Now, I have a reason behind this, okay? So, Blood Echo makes it so that whenever you hook a survivor, all other injured survivors suffer from the hemorrhage status effect until healed, and the exhaustion status effect for 45 seconds. It also has a cooldown of 60 seconds. I want to explain how this works. So the hemorrhage status effect makes it so that you bleed blood. I was about to say you bleed mud. You bleed mud. What the fuck? You bleed blood more. So this makes it very good with killers that can track blood. Spirit, Bloodhound, Oni, you know, just as an example. Killers who can track blood more effectively, Wraith. This works very well on them. Now, yes, it only works on injured survivors, so if the other 3 survivors are healthy, you may not get this. This works very well on pinball killers as well. Killers who can rapidly injure multiple survivors at a time, or against survivors who need to stay injured, or against survivors that don't have self-care. This is a massive benefit to you. This negates the next chase that you get into. If it's with an injured survivor, they have no escape. They have no sprint burst, they have no balance, they have no lift, they have no dead hard, they have no head on. It takes away some of the more annoying chase perks for killer, away from the survivor. It makes it so that they can't abuse those things against you. Particularly in the case of something like Dead Hard. It does have a 60-second cooldown, and it only works when you hook a survivor. So if you, like, are rapidly downing survivors and hooking them, you're not getting the benefit. But I think it's important to note that this exhaustion overrides other exhaustions they may have. So if they have a 10 seconds left on their exhaustion, and they get hit with Blood Echo, it goes back to 45 seconds. And the hemorrhage effect lasts until they're healed, much like Sloppy Butcher. Therefore, they have the same effect. And you can combo this with Sloppy Butcher. It does stack. I think it's a solid perk. I think a lot of killers can get value out of this. Legion, Plague, Oni, Spirit, Nurse, Wraith. Just, that's the short list that I can instantly come up with. Not to mention perks or add-ons. So, I think this is a very strong perk, but it requires more knowledge on your part to know how to use it. Blood Warden. This is a meta perk in my opinion. I'm sorry. The power of this perk is so strong, it overrides its limited use. It's like Adrenaline. Adrenaline is a one-time use perk that you only get at the end of the game. That's Blood Warden. Blood Warden is the killer version of Adrenaline. You could say Noed. We'll talk about that later on. No, I'm talking specifically Blood Warden here. The way this perk works is that whenever an exit gate is open, Blood Warden becomes activated. Once per match, whenever you hook a survivor while Blood Warden is active, the entity will block both exit gates for all survivors in the match for the next 60 seconds. Mind you, the game can only last for 2 minutes when an exit gate's been opened, and this perk blocks it for 1 minute. What this means is you could essentially... Oh, and it also reveals the aura of any survivors in the exit gate areas. That's not really the big deal. The thing is, so you need to wait to hook somebody until the timer gets down to under 1 minute. Then you hook somebody. Then you just wander around the map and do nothing. Because you have a 4K. Unless they can find a key and get out hatch, you have a 4K with this perk, if you can do that. Guaranteed. Blood Warden has counterplay. So first off, it only activates when a gate is open. That's why you see a lot of people will 99 the door instead of opening it. It's not counterproductive. It's actually counterproductive for them to do that, because if they do make the unhook and they need to get out, they now have to take a second to open the door, which, unless you're in a full survive with friends, that's not likely. I think this perk is very strong to run if you don't mind running 3 perks. The issue with Blood Warden really is its selectiveness. It does its job, and it does its job well. Even if you're just delaying survivors from leaving for 60 seconds, that's still enough time to chase and injure and down on, let's say, 1 or 2 more survivors and hook them and force that last 1 or 2 survivors left to decide, okay, I've got 2, potentially 3 people I need to get off hook. Do I need to just fucking bail when Blood Warden comes out, or what? It's a good stall tactic by the killer to keep the survivors from leaving and buys them some more time in a situation where the killer has seemingly lost control of a game. Next perk we're going to talk about is Bloodhound. Bloodhound is going to be a C tier perk. So, Bloodhound is going to get C tier perk, and another perk that is off the Wraith as well that's a tracking perk will not. And I'll talk about that when that comes up. See, what Bloodhound does is it makes it so that fresh blood marks are considerably more discernible, and they are tracked for 4 seconds longer than normal. This is because blood is probably the hardest of the 3 main tracking perks: sound, blood, and scratch marks. Blood is the hardest. It's the smallest thing, it's easy to miss, it can be hidden by your environment, tall grass, the corn. This can hide blood very easily. This makes it glow a little bit more. It makes it much easier to see. It's bigger. This works well off of mangled and hemorrhage effects like Sloppy Butcher. You can run this on its own. You can run this on a killer that can take advantage of it. This perk does its job. The downside to this perk is you don't necessarily need this to track. I'm a rank 16 killer, as indicated, okay? And that's only because I've been playing killer this split, which I don't normally play killer that much. I've played about 20 games at killer, and I'm rank 16. So, and I started at rank 20. So, just to put that in perspective, that There you go. I don't really need Bloodhound to track. I can track blood on my own. If you need it, it's there. If you don't need it, you just need to learn how to track with blood. That's why it's mid-tier. Brutal Strength. This is a B-tier perk. Again, this is a good perk to run if you feel it's worth the spot. This makes it so that you break pallets and kick generators faster. It also applies to breakable walls, and I'm glad they put that notation in there. Basically, this makes you cut down on downtime. This is like Agitation. It's a downtime perk. I think those perks are solid. They're just worth the slot if you think so. You know, if you're planning on kicking a generator repeatedly for a surveillance, pop, overcharge, if you're planning on breaking pallets because of Spirit Fury or Enduring, this perk definitely helps you in those situations. You can use it in chases to deny pallets faster. If you want to be sneaky and get a gen kick in before on a survivor in the middle of a chase without losing too much time. People don't understand that 20% faster really means. Remember, you take 2 seconds to kick something. So you're basically shaving off a little bit less than half a second. And that can be the difference between life or death in this game. Quite literally, from a survivor or killer side. So this perk is a solid perk. It doesn't do anything other than what's listed on the box, but it's a nice stat. It's a nice stat change. Cloraphobia. Oh god. We're gonna put this perk in the D tier. We are. I wish this perk was better. This perk makes it so that survivors healing in your terror radius have a 50% penalty to healing progress. I want to mention that this perk is single-handedly the greatest anti-heal perk in the game. It is a 50% penalty to healing, which stacks on top of self-care. That can triple the amount of time it takes for a survivor to self-care. Because remember, self-care is already doubling your healing speed. So why is this perk bad? Why is this perk so low tier? First off, there is a big glaring notification to the survivor when they start healing that pops up on their screen that says Cloraphobia, which is immediately going to tell the killer or tell the survivor, huh, I need to not heal here. In addition to it, this perk loses all value outside of your terror radius. Therefore, you need to combo this with A, having a large terror radius killer. You're not using this on Myers. You're not using this on Ghostface. You're not using this on Nurse. You're just not. You're not getting any value out of a stealth killer. You're not getting any value out of a low terror radius killer to begin with. This does not work on Freddy. This does not work on... Because, well, you're going to be injured 9 times out of 10 because he's hit you, and that puts you in Dream World, where you now lose terror radius in Dream World. This perk loses all value. About half the killers in this game realistically cannot take advantage of this perk. So that alone drops its value. On top of that, you usually need to pair this with something else. You need to pair this with Sloppy, so that they have slower healing speed outside of terror radius. You need to pair this with Thanatophobia to make it even harder for them to heal, and to encourage them to stay injured. You need to run this with Nurses, so you can track them if they do try and heal. You need to pair this with Distressing, so that you can increase... This perk requires so many other perks to combo with, to make it effective, and the fact that half the killers in the game can't even use it, that is why this perk is so low on the tier list. It's a great benefit, but it's too hard to actually get realistic value out of it. Another perk that will be going into the shit list would be Cruel Limits. This is a garbage tier perk. This is an E tier perk. We're going to be seeing a few of these perks off of a select few number of killers. This perk makes it so that every time a generator is completed, all windows and vault locations within a 24-meter radius of the completed generator are blocked for all survivors for the next 30 seconds. The value of this perk is that if a survivor tries to pop a generator in your face and you start chasing them after they complete it, that you can then chase them down and you've negated their vault locations so that they can't use them to break chase for 30 seconds. Okay, there are a few problems with this. One, 24 meters is not a large enough range. Let's start with that. The ideal place to use this would be Lurie's or Hawkins. They're vault-friendly locations. They have up or down. So, oh wow, Hawkins has up or down. It doesn't work for that. The reason is because that 24-meter radius is actually not very large. There are not as many vaults within 24 meters as you would think. On a large map, this is completely useless. So that limits you to smaller indoor maps, which Preschool and Haddonfield it could also work on because they're indoor-outdoor, not a particularly small thing. This also doesn't work against second-story flights, so anyone with balanced landing is completely unaffected. This also doesn't work against pallets, which means half the map is still safe for survivors because all you've done is negate that. In addition to this, the survivor could simply just leave. And if the survivor is not near, if you're not near the survivors that complete the gen, this perk loses all value. You're going to lose 10 to 15 seconds traveling to where they are in the first place. Half your perk is now gone by the time you could actually initiate a chase. And if that survivor has left already, this perk loses all of its value. This perk just simply does not give you any value at all unless you are trying to run low terror radius killer and jump scare them as they complete a generator. This is worse than Bitter Murmur, which actually rewards you with some knowledge. All this does is let you know what vaults can't be used for the next 30 seconds. That's it. I would even say that's not enough. The next perk that we have is Dirk Devotion. I'm going to give Dirk Devotion a little bit of love here, and I'm going to put this as a C tier perk. It fits well in Obsession build. It fits well in a stealth build. Dirk Devotion is a solid perk. However, it could actually be a B tier perk if you know how to use it, and it could actually be a D tier perk, if not E tier, if you have no idea how this perk works. Allow me to explain. You become obsessed with one survivor. When you hit the obsession with a basic attack, the obsession will emit a 32-meter terror radius for 30 seconds and give you the undetectable status for the duration. And the obsession hears their terror radius. Okay, I want to explain the benefits of this. Now, the only real trade-off is that this only affects one survivor. So you basically have to tunnel that survivor and randomly run into that survivor. And sometimes if you're playing a stealth killer and you don't initiate chase, you won't know they're the obsession when you go after them. So using this early in a game is very hard. This game gets more value later on in the game. It's not a very common perk as well, so most survivors are not used to it. In addition, this perk has basically no cooldown on it. It works for 30 seconds. And then you instantly can just hit the survivor again and get another 30 seconds. You can't, like, stack it. It doesn't, like, reset if you hit the obsession in that time, but you shouldn't be doing that. What this perk lets you do is hit and run. This is a great perk for forcing a pinball. So if you're playing a character who cannot rapidly injure and keep multiple survivors busy at a time, let's say the Hag. Let's say they're destroying your traps with flashlights, so you can't do that. This perk becomes very effective. This perk also works on stealth killers, and this perk also works on small terror radius killers. And this perk also works on no terror radius killers, which I'll talk about in a sec. But there's two I want to mention. This perk works very well on stealth killers like Wraith, because you can come out of the bell, hit somebody, go back into the bell, and now the injured survivor is running around the map, and it works if you injure them or down them, as long as you hit them. You can injure them or down them, they run around or crawl around the map, and the other survivors are thinking, wait, that's where the killer is. You could just go around and freely chase for the next 30 seconds, and then come back over there. It works with nurses, because now the survivor who needs to heal is emitting the terror radius. So if they're trying to avoid healing in terror radius for nurses, they have no choice, which lets you sneak up on them. You can give killers that don't have any stealth or any undetectable stealth with this perk. This is the best perk in the game for giving stealth. However, there are some trade-offs. First off, it only applies to one survivor. Good survivors will know. For example, if they have a constant heartbeat, they're going to know, if they're smart enough, Dirk Devotion. I can honestly say, the first time I went up against this perk was about 3 months ago. That's how little it's used in the game. This perk has been out for over a year now, and the first time I went up against it was 3 months ago. I actually noticed it. I was the Obsession, I had a ghost face running it, he would hit me and run away, and I had this constant beating heartbeat, and I did not understand why, and I thought it was another glitch on Ghostface. And then I caught on when he would just hit me and leave, and it never went away. He's like, wait, he's leaving me. Why do I... He's running Dirk Devotion. But once I knew that, I could use that to my advantage. Because the thing as well is the Obsession here is the terror radius. Well, the killer does not. So what I would do is, I would run to the corner of the map to heal. So the other survivors would not go to that part of the map. Well, I would run to other healing survivors and force them to run away so that they had to go work on gens or something instead of healing. It basically makes it so that it puts a second killer into the game for a limited amount of time. And I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, but a lot of people don't really understand how powerful this perk can be. The issue is, if you're not finding your Obsession, if you don't use your basic attack a lot, like if you're a Legion and you're trying to use Feral Frenzy, this does not apply. So this perk gets very little value in a situation like that. And also, if you injure them and continue to chase them, this loses effectiveness. That's basically 30 seconds where you can go stealth and chase somebody else. So, I think it's a good perk, but it requires so much knowledge on your end to use, which is one of the reasons why I want to stop and explain. I think it is a mid-tier perk. Next perk that we have is Deadman Switch. We're going to be putting this in B-tier perk. Deadman Switch is a lot stronger than people give it credit for. Now, this is a perk that is completely on the survivors if they can use it. It is an Obsession perk. This makes it so that you become obsessed with one survivor, and whenever you hook the Obsession, it activates for the next 45 seconds. Now, mind you, you might say, well, you only get 3 uses out of this. That's not exactly true. You can move your Obsession around with Furtive, Decisive. Well, that's the survivor side, you know. Again, this fits well. I think the Obsession perks are hit or miss. I think some work and I think some don't. But this perk does work well, in my opinion. While activated, any survivor, so basically for the next 45 seconds, any survivor that stopped repairing a generator will block it until the end of the 45-second window. And those affected generators are highlighted. Now, this is basically Thrilling Tremors, but with a different activation cost. The reason why this is so strong is because this works incredibly well when you need to prevent survivors from completing a generator. I will also note, this works if 2 survivors are on a generator. If 2 survivors are on a generator and 1 leaves to get the unhook, it knocks everybody off. If you have a gen that is 90% completed and it blocks off, you can go over and pop that gen, provided you have pop tier 2 or 3. I feel that's important to note. The key here with this perk is it enables you as a killer to force survivors to choose between objective and altruism. You can force the survivors to cramp and crowd a hook instead of spreading out and doing gens, which makes it much easier for you as the killer to down and injure survivors. It forces them to come to you a little bit. If you have a survivor that's going to commit to working on the generator, that's 45 seconds where they're not doing anything else. And if they decide they need to do something else because you're chasing them off or because they're the only one that can get the unhook, then there's no progress on that gen for 45 seconds. And while you might say, well, if I get off the generator with, 10 seconds left on Deadman Switch, you're not losing with that much time. Consider how much time 10 seconds is when you're completing a generator. Considering how much time that is. This is a very strong perk, but I think you need to have a perk that can move the Obsession around, or you need to be able to chase survivors off. Distressing is a C tier perk in my opinion. A lot of people are going to be surprised at that. It does what it says it does. It increases your terror radius. This is the perk that if you need to increase your terror radius, this is the perk for you. It increases your terror radius by 26%. So to put that in terms, if you are a 32-meter terror radius killer, this will increase your terror radius by a quarter. Well, what's a quarter? 8 meters. This increases it to 40. That extra range is important on certain killers, like, for example, the Doctor. It also gives you 100% more blood points for deviousness. Basically, using your power gives you more things. Why would you want to run this perk? This perk increases your terror radius. I mean, if you need a terror radius build to increase it, this perk does its job. This perk plays incredibly well if you're trying to get blood points. It plays well if you're trying to use other terror radius perks like Cloraphobia. It works better on large terror radius killers than small ones, but if you're running a small terror radius killer, this can also benefit you as well. The main benefit is, well, there's also a hidden benefit. A lot of survivors take the terror radius as like a god-given sign of where the killer is exactly. So when they hear it, they start looking around and panicking, which means they're not really paying attention. This can actually be a stealth perk as killer. Mind you, you're increasing your terror radius by an additional 8 meters. That means that's an additional 8 meters where the survivor does not know where you are, especially if they don't have line of sight. They don't know where you are. They may get off of a generator early and start to slowly walk away, or urban evasion, or go hide in a locker, which means more time where they're not doing things on the game that they need to progress. Basically, if you're running a terror radius build, this is what you want to put on. It's mid-tier, it's there if you need it. If you don't need it, then you don't run it. Next perk that we have is Dying Light. I'm not personally a fan of this perk, but it is a B-tier perk. I think this is more... I think it's more than it needs to be. I think it's harder to use than it potentially needs to be. I do miss the old way of Dying Light, even though it was a tunneling low fucking perk. Now, let me explain first off why this is a B tier perk. Right now, in the game, there are only 2 perks that can actually slow repair speed. This is one of those 2. So that is why it is there. Now we'll talk about the rest of the perk. So it's an obsession perk, and it works each time you hook a survivor other than your obsession. So the other 3 survivors, you gain a token. Each token adds 3% penalty for repair, heal, sabotage. Alright, let's start. That means you can get a maximum of 9 tokens. However, this only works as long as the obsession is alive. You kill your obsession off early, or they DC, this perk is gone. More of the obsession, gone. The obsession is not affected by this. So that means that the only people that are affected by this perk are the people that you have to kill to get value out of. In addition to that, your obsession gets a massive fucking boost in altruism. They get a 33% heal and unhook bonus. They essentially get botany knowledge or leader. You can put leader on as well. And it stacks, by the way. So if they're already running botany knowledge, they almost will make it for free. So, why is this such a bad perk? This perk encourages you to avoid the obsession. Think about it. If you tunnel the obsession to get them onto death hook at the start of the game, and they don't make it off hook and actually die, you've now lost this perk entirely. This perk only affects 75% of the people, and those people that you need to go after are the only ones affected by it. If you can move the obsession around with affirmative, or decisive, or nemesis, then this perk gets a little bit more value. But then you have to run the risk of randomly killing your obsession as well. You have to pay much more attention to who you're chasing and killing. I would say that this perk has so many activation costs, it's hard to get value out of. But considering it's one of the only repair slowdowns in the game, it can be worth it. If you can get 4 or 5 stacks, you're looking at a 12 or 15% penalty in repair for 3 survivors. That is so strong right now, considering how hard it is for you as a killer to actually slow gen speed. Next perk that we have is Franklin's Demise, and this is an A tier perk. I'm sorry, it is. It is single-handedly the most annoying perk in the game to go against as a survivor, in my opinion. This perk makes it so that basic attacks make survivors lose their item, and they lose some of their charges. So if they're like trying to 99 it, that's not really the point though. The thing with this perk, what makes it so strong, is that First off, survivors are not expecting it. Because you hit them and they lose their item. Oh my god, now it's like, oh shit. This perk has so much value. A lot of high-level survivors do not run self-care. Therefore, you can negate medkits, you can negate any way that they have of healing. In addition to this, you can stop doing it on toolboxes isn't as effective anymore as it used to be. This is great against maps and keys. This works great against flashbangs. Flashbangs are immediately consumed when they're by Franklins, and maps and keys are some of the most powerful items in the game. You can completely negate that. Flashlights as well, if you don't want them to flashlight blind. You know, this works well. This is a great way to make survivors move objects around, because usually you'll just randomly find an object in the environment. You know, another survivor picks it up. Well, now you have a different person to worry about having an item, but that's not the point. You can always take it away with Franklin. It makes it so that if survivors think they can get out of a game with a high-value item, you can say no. And it even works in an endgame scenario where you hit them as they're leaving, they still lose that item. This basically denies survivors their items, and I don't think you understand how strong that really is. Just getting hit one time, yeah, they may be able to run away and heal up, have another survivor heal them. They're going to come back to that item. You can camp that item if you need to. I've done that before. I've literally done that with Survive with Friends as a killer. I will sit there and chainsaw camp a fucking key if I know you're a full stack. You're going to come get that key, you're going to get a chainsaw. So it can be a setup perk for other things in the game, but the thing is, every killer in the game can use it. Nine times out of 10, you either have to use your M1 to down somebody, or you always have that option, like a Billy or a Plague. You have that option. Somebody like a Legion or a Wraith, well, you have to use it. It is a single-handedly the most... It has to be a meta perk, I'm sorry. Alright, so now we're going to go on to Furtive Chase. Furtive Chase is a D tier perk. It has two benefits, but only one of them is good. And the benefit it has is so minor it may not be worth the perk slot, which means it requires a full build. What it does is you become obsessed with one survivor. When you hook the obsession, it receives a token, up to 4 tokens. Your terror radius will decrease by 4 meters while in chase for each token you have. This means that at a maximum of 4 tokens, you have a 16-meter terror radius reduction in chase. This means 2 things. One, it means that the survivor that you are chasing is pretty much completely unaffected by this because they're going to hear your terror radius anyway. This works on a low terror radius killer. People have said you can run this with Monitor. People are also idiots and don't realize that Monitor increases your terror radius while you're in chase. So if you have this at max tokens, you can lose it. You can shorten your terror radius, but you can't negate it completely. This does not work on certain killers. It's not going to work on Freddy. It's not going to work on Huntress. They still get the lullaby. What it does work on is large terror radius killers, dropping their terror radius from 32 down to 16. Or on a smaller terror radius killer like the Hag or the Spirit, dropping it from 24 down to 8. Why is the value not worth it? 9 times out of 10, the survivor in chase is going to hear your terror radius. This perk is for the other survivors on the map, so they can't hear your terror radius. On a map with large line of sight, this works well because you can, if another survivor is ignoring you because they can't hear terror radius, let's say you're 10 meters away, and they're ignoring you, thinking you're chasing them, you can just turn and start to chase them, and it can give you some pinball effect. It does not work on interior maps like that, unless you're running a stealth killer who doesn't need it. The other benefit is that it causes the survivor who gets off the hook, who's the obsession, to transfer the obsession to the rescuer. This lets you move your obsession around, as that becomes critical with Dying Light. That becomes critical with Nemesis. That becomes critical with Dirk Devotion. This is a decent anti-tunnel for obsession effects, because now you want to go after the obsession instead. So, it does work well. for moving Obsession around, but it's not great. The big problem is you lose all of your tokens if your Obsession dies. So, it works up to a certain point. If the Obsession just dies on hook, you lose all value again. Or if they DC, you lose all value again. So, the benefit it provides is moving the Obsession around. Not really the terror radius and chase benefit. Now we're going to talk about our Hex perks. Well, almost all of them. We have Hex, Devour Hope. I'm not going to include the Hex when I write it on my list, by the way. Devour Hope. Now, mind you, I want to talk about it very briefly for those that don't understand before we talk about the Hex perks. Hex perks are totem perks. If you see that glowing totem and you cleanse it, it will either deactivate or activate the effect of the totem. Some totems are protection totems that work when you cleanse it. Some totems are active for as long as the totem stays up. It depends on what specific perk you're running. These perks are inherently high risk, high reward to run. They are specifically designed to give you a powerful benefit and force the survivor to cleanse the totem or to punish the survivor for cleansing the totem. That is the way these perks work. So we are going to ignore the fact for this tier list that these totems are strong or weak depending on what totem spawns you get. For example, if you get a shitty-ass Coldwind Farm spawning in the fucking middle of a cornfield totem, and it's Devour Hope, we're not going to talk about the fact that your perk is completely gone 15 seconds into the game. We are only going to talk about the benefit of the perk, because the simple fact of the matter is, some survivors do not cleanse totems. Some survivors gen rush and get out, or they're too busy trying to flashlight click and get the killer to chase them to actually play and get rid of the totem. So, because the survivors are the only ones that can touch the totems, and it's completely random what survivors are going to do regarding the totems, we're not talking about that. We're simply going to talk about the benefit. Devour Hope, I think right now, is the strongest in the game. It's the strongest in the game. It is also the one that is most likely to get broken, but it's the strongest in the game. So what happens is this perk activates off of tokens. You gain these tokens whenever a survivor is rescued from a hook and you are 24 meters away. You get a notification on your screen. It lights up when you are 24 meters away from that survivor. Or 24 meters away from that hook. This perk works well with barbecue. Hook them, go to the other side of the map to chase them, Devour activates. Works like a charm. Bonus blood points, and you get the effect. So the way it works is you get after 2 tokens, you get a 5% haste effect for 10 seconds after hooking a survivor for a duration of 10 seconds. This basically lets you get away from the hook faster so that they don't immediately deny you that 3rd token. That effect is pretty much meaningless. We're not talking about that. Then you have your 3rd token, which now all survivors suffer from the exposed effect. This is where it becomes a very risky proposition. If the survivors don't know, you have the Devour. At 3 tokens, you now have the main benefit of Devour, which is instant exposed effect. Everyone in the game has become a one-shot. Now, you can use your power to negate this. If you're someone like a Billy, you can chainsaw to prevent survivors from knowing you have this yet. Especially if you run something like Ruin, and they're like, oh, that's just Ruin I see over there. And then you get to 5 tokens, you can now start mooring survivors. The issue with Devour is that 2 things happen when survivors know you have it. A, they start suiciding on hook, and B, they start cleansing totems. And they start looking for them. So, very high risk, high reward. If you can get it up to 3, 5 stacks, awesome. Works like a charm, great fucking perk. Awesome. Most fun you'll have as a killer. It's also a complete, like other hex perks, it's a complete waste of a spot. But the fact that you can get a Mori, you can have unlimited exposed effect until they touch the totem on any killer in the game, and the fact that you can get unlimited Mori as long as you can get the stacks up, great. Meta. A tier. Win-win. Next, we have Hex Haunted Ground. Fuck. My controller dropped. Haunted Ground, to me, is going to be a B tier perk. It is a protection perk for your totem. This means that it activates when the survivor cleanses the totem. What this does is it basically spawns 2 fake hex totems. They will glow, they look like regular hex totems, and when you cleanse that hex totem, instead, it will give all survivors on the map the exposed effect for 60 seconds. The other hex totem now becomes dull. So this is a good trap perk to run. This is a good, you've activated my trap card moment. Basically, it makes it so that now all survivors have to play on edge. If you use this, if a survivor just randomly pops this while you're in chase, it means that that full health survivor has lost a lot of fucking time. It only works for 60 seconds. And if the survivors cleanse it early in the game, you can lose all value. Or if the survivors cleanse it while you aren't chasing anyone, you lose all value. It works better to protect other hex totems than it does to actually be used on its own. But you can use it on killers who don't have exposed effects like the Wraith to bait out a slightly easier chase. It's basically just a punishment. And by having the 2 fake hex totems, they may think you have more perks than you actually have. And, you know, Devour is a thing. And if they're trying to get rid of Devour and they get rid of Haunted Ground and you're not even running Devour and you get a 4K in that 60 seconds, I salute you. It's a solid perk, but then again, it is just such a limited effect. It's a short amount of time. Some survivors can completely counter it. I mean, it is a B tier perk, but considering that you need to protect your hex totems, it makes it more valuable because it protects your other perks. Huntress Lullaby is a B tier perk. I'm actually downgrading this because I understand that it's sad. This perk is an awesome perk. It works very well for giving you extra tracking ability and giving you extra slowdown. What this perk does is it's a token-based perk. You get a token every time you hook a survivor. Each token makes the time between the skill check sound and the skill check on screen get shorter and shorter and shorter. Eventually, it will get to no skill check warning whatsoever. It also makes it so that if a survivor fails a skill check, there's an additional 6% regression. That puts it at a 16% regression in total. The issue with this is as soon as you get a skill check, it notifies the survivors, Huntress is in play, and they start looking for the totem. It also can be completely cleansed before you get any effect out of it. And survivors who are paying attention to their screen and just ignoring the sound effect, and are just looking for it instead, are just watching the screen, they are completely immune to this, except for the regression. And if they can hit their skill checks, then, yeah, this is pretty much a worthless perk. The value is against survivors who are not paying attention. So, if you're in chase when this activates, and you go to hit a skill check, and all of a sudden there's no fucking sound effect because your first skill check, for example, is at 5 tokens, oh well. Have fun. It's a good perk for giving some tracking and for slowing the survivors down a little bit. It's mostly a time-wasting perk. It's very strong if you can get it to work, but I think it's one of those perks that relies more on the survivor's ability to counter it for you to get value out of it. If they know how to counter it, you get very little value. Hex Noed. Oh my god. Probably unilaterally one of the most... I can't say it's the most. I'll say it's one of the most hated perks in the game for killer. Like, survivors hate this perk. Like, up there with Franklin's for me. Hex Noed, or No One Escapes Death, is evil. What it does is it makes it so that as long as you have one dull totem on the map when the exit gates are powered, the hex is then applied to it. All survivors suffer from the exposed effect, and you get a slight boost of movement speed. This is not used for the movement speed. You're not using this for that. It's 4%. It's worthless. You're using it for the exposed effect. This is basically adrenaline. Like Warden, it is adrenaline for killer. This makes it so that if you failed all game long, you have not been getting hooks, you have not been getting downs, this perk can reward you, and this is the entity saying, okay, Here's a reward for fucking up. I'm giving you one last shot. Here is the golden sword of doom. I slayeth these foul minions. That's basically what the entity's saying to you. Okay, it's go time. Juice up, and let's go. Give Popeye his can of spinach. Kill everybody. This perk has 3 benefits. 1, it completely negates a survivor's ability to escape. They cannot risk taking a hit. They go down. They go on hook. You die. Period. Is the added effect of forcing survivors to leave. It negates altruism. As soon as NOED comes into play, it is an instant warning to all of the other survivors. Look, bitch, you've got 5 seconds to look for that totem and get the fuck out. That's your warning to all the other survivors in the game, that if you want to come back and get this save, you now have to risk you dying in addition to the person on hook dying. In addition to that, it also forces them to now be much more stealthy. So that brash, aggressive character that spent all game teabagging and flashlight clicking and pallet stunning is now scared shitless. If they had been wasting their defenses earlier in the game, like if they had been wasting their pallets, if they had been abusing their loops, and you've caught on to what they're trying to do, and you now know how their mind game works at certain areas, and there's no pallets on that part of the map, you could just sit there and smile and go, yeah, boy. The downside to this perk is that survivors can negate this perk before the game even starts. You cleanse all the totems on the map before the end of the game, there's no NOED. You've now done this. This is a secondary objective. And as a killer, if you have not been getting downs or hooks and you run NOED and you lose that NOED, this is a very big blow to you. You've essentially lost the game at that point. There is nothing you have left at your disposal. The downside as well is it can be cleansed while it is active. It can be cleansed before you even down a survivor. He downs a survivor, the killer downs a survivor with it, and you've now lost your use of it. It can also be cleansed after you've downed a survivor with it, which effectively forces you to now protect that one survivor you did get with it. Otherwise, you're not getting that. However, the value of this perk is an instant anti-altruism. This is an instant, oh, you want to come back for that save with borrowed time? Test me. Type perk. That's my dog snoring in the back, by the way. The next perk that we have is Hex Retribution. And I'm going to be putting this perk in the C tier. This is a protection perk for your Hex totems. This makes it so that whenever a survivor cleanses a totem, they get hit with a certain affliction. If they cleanse a dull totem, they will suffer from the Oblivious status effect for 45 seconds. This is not a particularly great thing to have. Most survivors can ignore the Oblivious effect. I would say the real value of this is for someone who's not paying attention, which you may already be able to get a grab off them anyways. If they're not paying attention, if you're playing a stealth killer, this has no value as well. This really doesn't do anything when they cleanse the dull totem. I would say the main benefit for that is to pair this with Thrill of the Hunt, which we'll get to later. And you know they're working on a totem, so you start going over to protect it. They pop the totem before you get over there, and now they lose terror radius. They're like, oh, he went away. And you can maybe get a free hit on them. It's not that effective. The main benefit to this is that anytime a Hex totem, including this one, is cleansed, the aura of all survivors is revealed for 10 seconds. It's actually glitched, by the way. It's actually 15 seconds. So I want to mention that. It is 15 and not 10. Why is this perk weak? Well, first off, you have to lose a Hex totem in order for this to be valuable. So unless you plan on running this with Haunted Ground, where it doesn't fucking matter, but now you have basically 2 perks that are dedicated to losing them in-game, to not give a fuck, to just laugh at the... This is the equivalent of Millhouse, of Nelson Muntz. Ha ha! Just running and going, ha ha, at you as a survivor. That's literally what this at Haunted does. That's all it is. Yes, you can see the aura of all survivors for 10 seconds. 10 seconds is such a small amount of time. Like, it's helpful if you have, like, a Blendette hiding around the corner while you're chasing another survivor, and you just round the corner and Obi-Wan Kenobi them and go, hello there, and fucking smack them. Yeah, then you get value out of this perk. You know how rare that is, that you're going to get that in the long run? I mean, It's not good. The other effect, too, it says, if any hex totem, including this one, is cleansed, the aura of all survivors. You know what that means? If they cleanse that hex totem first, and let's say you're running all other hexes, guess what? You don't see their auras when all of the other hexes are cleansed now, because this is a hex perk. I think this should be a basic perk. This shouldn't be a hex perk. If this was a basic perk, move it up. The fact that it is a hex perk weakens its value to me. This should just be a basic part of the game. It can work in a build. I'm actually downgrading this. I'm actually going to put this in D tier. The more I think about it, it's just simply not a strong enough perk to even justify the C tier. I want to add more perks to low tier, because there's a lot of perks I won't run on Killer. Next, we have Hex Ruin. Oh god, Ruin. I'm going to put this in C tier. It's going to take the spot that Retribution had, so... This used to be the #1 killer perk of the game. It was used in 80% of fucking killer games. That's how good it was. It was single-handedly the most run perk in the game. Killer or Survivor. And they nerfed it. So what did they do? Whenever a generator is not being repaired by a Survivor, it immediately and automatically begins regressing at 200% of the normal regression speed. So, what that means is that it takes 2 seconds for the generator to regress by 1 second. Tier 2 of this makes it take 3 seconds to regress it by 1, and tier 1 of it is 4 seconds to regress by 1 second. So, that just put that in perspective as well. Well, what does this mean? If a survivor spends 30 seconds working on a gen, you need to be able to chase them off that generator for 60 seconds for it to go back to nothing. There is a benefit to this. It does work well with certain types of tracking perks, mainly surveillance, and it does work well on killers who are able to pinball and effectively chase other survivors and get multiple survivors off of generators, and it has value if you can chase somebody off a gen that's close to completion and no one goes back for it. The downside to this perk, A, is it's a hex perk. It gets cleansed, you lose its value. And considering it's been nerfed from what it once was, rest in peace, that it makes it very difficult to want to defend. Survivors that see Ruin aren't really like, oh, okay, I need to get off the generator. Okay. Pretty much it just forces, it lets you get an extra hit maybe if the survivors are like, I'm going to stay on this for as long as I can and get off at the last minute and end up taking a hit. So, I guess it works for getting early first hits. That's about it. The fact that it doesn't work if they don't get off the gen, which means if you're not pressuring multiple survivors and keeping them off of generators, you're not getting value out of this. It also negates your ability to kick a gen and apply status effects off the kick. So you're not using pop, you're not using overcharge off of this perk, and those perks right now are so much stronger than this is. The next perk we're going to talk about would be Hex Third Seal. This is again a C tier perk. I will give this perk some love. I'm not going to give it much love, but I'm going to give it some love. I like running this. It's kind of a fun meme build. Basically, whenever you hit a survivor with a basic attack, it applies the blindness effect to them. And it lasts as long as the totem is up. This means that at tier 3, hitting all 4 survivors means they cannot see auras. This negates a lot of survivor perks, which is critical. You're not seeing survivors on hooks. You're not seeing survivors who are downed. You're not seeing generators. You're not seeing chests. You're not seeing totems. You know, whatever you're running to see auras. Killers, you're not seeing it. It's basically a perk that counters survivor perks. And it can be very fun, especially if that survivor is relying on that perk. It is not the end-all be-all, though. Spine Chill still counters this perk with blindness. It doesn't counter that. If it countered that, I would give this perk more love. And it's also the fact that it realistically doesn't do anything to help you, other than negating the survivor's abilities to see each other and other things in their environment. That's about all it does. It hinders the survivor, but most survivors can overcome it. It's kind of an annoyance, though, because it can force survivors to play a lot differently, or to run into each other randomly and chase, which can get you an extra kill or two. The fact that it's a hex perk makes it hard to use. Alright, so now we're back to our regularly scheduled non-hexy programming, and that is including Infectious Fright. I have mixed opinions on this. This is a perk that I shit on, and this is one of the more meta perks for killer that I shit on. Remember, I have 3 meta perks that I usually shit on. This is one of it. This is a D tier perk for me. Don't get me wrong, you can get value out of this as a tracking perk. The way it works is, whenever you down a survivor, all other survivors in your terror radiuses will yell and reveal their location for 6 seconds. Now, that is great because it lets you know how many survivors are in your terror radius. That's the only benefit of this perk. If you're playing a stealth killer, if you are playing a low terror radius killer, if you are playing Freddy, you get no value out of this. You have to understand that if you're trying to play around certain builds, this perk doesn't work. This perk works well in a, I want big terror radius build, which is already sometimes putting you at a disadvantage. In addition to that, they yell and reveal their location, which means this is countered by Calm Spirit. No yell, no reveal of location. This is countered by getting into a locker. This is also countered by simply the survivor moving. Where their location is when they yell is what is revealed to you for 6 seconds. It's just a bubble. It does not move. It does not track with them. It is not an aura reveal. It is not a loud noise notification that stays on your screen for 6 seconds. It just pops up whenever you look in that direction for 6 seconds. It's designed to be a slug and chase type perk. Down somebody, go chase that guy. Down somebody, go chase the next guy. It's also designed to counter flashlight saves or pallet saves because it lets you know if someone is nearby to get the save. So maybe you go, okay, I'm going to look at the wall when I pick this guy up. Realistically, there's little value to me as a killer. For how killer is played these days, this perk gets very little value. And in addition to that, if the killer decides to make an effort to slug and chase the survivor that's revealed, any survivors who are not revealed can potentially sneak in and get that person up, or if that person has Unbreakable. I mean, this perk is pretty much good for denying Decisive, and that's about it. Insidious. Oh my god, this is such a fucking low tier perk. This is an E tier perk. It is sad. I wish this perk could be used for more things. It is simply a camping perk. There is actually one singular benefit to this perk outside of camping with it. Basically, you stand still for 2 seconds and you get undetectable status. This works in one situation outside of camping. At the start of the game, when the camera is introducing as a killer, introducing you to the map and showing you your surroundings that you spawned in before it goes into first person, this counts for the 2 seconds you need for the undetectable. So at the start of the game, you will have no terror radius. You will be undetectable. When the survivors spawn in, if they're running object or a blood amber, they are not going to be able to see you. This is the only benefit to this perk, is for that one split-second moment at the start of the game before you actually move. Other than that, this is a camping perk. That's all it's good for. Stand still, and all of a sudden, they don't know where you went. That's it. That's nothing else to say. It's garbage. You can only use it for camping. And unless you're somebody that thinks that a basement build Bubba is the top-rated killer in the game, enjoy your rank 20. That's all I gotta say. Iron Maiden. This is an interesting perk to run. I'm gonna put it in C tier. This is a perk that normally is only going to benefit one killer in the game, and that is Huntress. She needs to search lockers faster to get more hatchets to reload, so opening the locker 50% faster makes her reload faster. This is a stat that even if you're going to compare it to like Brutal or Agitation, where, oh yeah, it slightly increases, no. You're not spending too much time searching lockers. The main benefit is that when a survivor gets out of a locker, they get the exposed effect for 15 seconds, and their location is revealed for 4 seconds. Again, this is a pop-up bubble. This is not very strong. But it doesn't need to be, because they're getting out of a locker. It is a fixed point on the map. So yes, the survivor may run away, but it's letting you know what locker they got out of. Basically, this perk is designed to counter Inner Strength and Iron Maiden, or Head On and Decisive. Because If they want to fuck around and try and run a locker build on you, you can use this to counter them if you're quick enough to get over there and make a play. So you can't use this in terror radius. It forces survivors to avoid that in your terror radius because you have enough time. 15 seconds is enough time to get over to the locker and go, "Hi there, wanna play?" with the survivor. So I would say this is a decent perk for countering locker builds if you're annoyed by decisive and head-on. I would also say that this is countered by Calm Spirit because they're not going to stream, so they're not going to have their location given away. Therefore, this perk loses a lot of its value. It's pretty much a Huntress perk, and once a survivor knows you have it, they're not getting into a locker again. So it's kind of a one and done where it's telling the survivor, don't go into there. Don't open the door. Next, we have Lightborn. Lightborn to me is a D tier perk. Lightborn is good at what it does, but what it does isn't strong enough to warrant a perk slot. It makes it so that your resistance to being blinded is increased by 80%. This means that a survivor is going to waste almost their entire flashlight if they're not running batteries add-ons if they want to blind you one time. It makes it so that one flashlight is one blind, pretty much. It also makes it you recover from that blindness twice as fast, 50% faster. Solid perk, great perk to run if you have a problem with flashlights. The problem is, avoiding a flashlight is usually pretty easy. You just look up or you just look down. This perk basically prevents you from getting blinded when you're breaking a pallet, which is when you're most vulnerable to it. When you're carrying a survivor, it's kind of easy to avoid. You can look at a wall so they can't blind you. If you have a hard time dealing with flashlights, or you're running a full team of flashlights, this perk will get value. I would say if you want to counter flashlights better, I would run a different perk instead. I would run Franklin's. It also counters flashbangs as well, but again, I would run Franklin's. I think Franklin's is superior to Lightborn. I would say this is really only good in a situation where you're afraid of the flashlight. Mad Grit. This is a C tier perk for me. Mad Grit is interesting because the situation where it comes into play is very rare, but unless you're with a Survive with friends, they're not going to know you have this perk, which gives it a bit of stealth factor to it. The way this works is whenever you are carrying a survivor and you go to attack another survivor while you're carrying them, there's two effects that will happen. You will either miss and you have no cooldown, so you can just rapidly swing while you're carrying them. Or if you hit them, it will pause the wiggling survivor's timer for 4 seconds. What this perk does is it makes it so that you can attack while carrying a survivor with no penalty. Now that situation is rare, but it does work in a basement build. Why this perk becomes effective is because remember that you have to suffer a cooldown when you hit a survivor with a basic attack. You have to recover your weapon. Therefore, usually that is a good 2 to 3 seconds where you're slowing down, where the survivor on your shoulder can wiggle off and you can't do anything about it. This prevents that. This is a way to stop a survivor from wiggling off your shoulder by just hitting someone. It discourages body blocking, and it makes it very difficult for a survivor to get off your shoulder. Basically, again, this is a perk you run if you think the slot is worth it, you can run this perk. Would I say it's a good perk to run on its own? Not without other perks, which is why it's in C tier. It's not B tier because the effect is not strong enough. It basically guarantees hooks and agitation, and Iron Grasp to do that better. But we'll get to Iron Grasp later. This is just a perk that you run to counter body blocking, pretty much. And if that's something that annoys you, feel free to run it. It's worth the slot if it is. Make your choice. This is an A tier perk. Your choice is a perk where when a survivor rescues another survivor from a hook and you are 32 meters away from you, Make Your Choice activates, and it makes the rescuer have the exposed effect for the next 60 seconds. It says it has a cooldown of 60 seconds, but basically that means you can only use it once every 60 seconds. So once you apply it to somebody, it's there. Now the issue is you won't know the survivor who is the rescuer. That's the thing. Now, this works very well if the survivor runs babysitter and shows you their aura, because now all of a sudden it's like, oh, hi, you know what survivor to go after. This is a great perk to run because it's a I won't call it an anti-tunnel, I'll call it a Y tunnel perk. Have you ever been driving down a tunnel and all of a sudden there's two ways to go, left and right? Going down the left path would mean tunneling the survivor off of hook. But why wouldn't you do that when you could run, make your choice, and go the right way? Now, basically, the person that rescues is exposed for the next 60 seconds, which means just randomly running into them in the middle of a chase lets you just down them instantly. It is a perk that's designed to counter altruism by forcing the person who was the make your choice to play it a lot more safe. They're not going to sit under the hook and heal in case the killer comes back to tunnel now. It changes how the survivor who makes the unhook plays because it forces them to choose between being aggressive to the killer and risk going down in one shot, or actually just being kind of a dick and say, oh, fuck you, I'll make your choice, bye, I'm out. Mindbreaker. This is a garbage tier perk. There is no value to this perk whatsoever. While repairing a generator, survivors are afflicted with the exhausted effect while the generator they are working on is below 50% progress. What this means is as soon as the generator gets above 50%, that exhausted effect stays. Any existing exhausted effects are paused while the survivor is repairing a generator. Now this would be great if it applied above that 50% mark. I've tested it, it does not. You still lose that exhaustion effect. Or I should say, the exhaustion effect will resume ticking back down once the gen gets above 50%. And after ending the repair action, the survivor is afflicted by the exhaustion status effect for 3 seconds. Again, only as long as the generator is below 50%. This means that one good toolbox completely negates this perk. Not to mention the fact that there is no value to this perk other than Sprint Burst. It counters Sprint Burst. Are you annoyed by Sprint Burst? Do you not want to run things that cause exhaustion like Blood Echo? Well, have I got the perk for you. Introducing Mindbreaker, the shittiest perk from Dead by Daylight. It is honestly, probably in my opinion, one of the top 5 worst perks in the game, because the survivors doing something that they're going to do anyways counters this perk. So, we're not going to talk about this perk anymore. The next perk we're going to be talking about is one, Monitor and Abuse. This is going to be a B tier perk. This is a very common perk. You will see a lot of people running this perk. It's good at what it does. It all depends on whether you need it. Basically, this is what we like to call the sneak perk. This lets you sneak up on survivors a little bit easier. While you are outside of a chase, your terror radius is decreased by 8 meters. So if you are running a stealthy killer, for example, a Death Slinger, you can sneak on them a lot easier. And if you're running a large terror radius killer like a Billy, this lets you get a little bit closer before they start to get weary of you. And your FOV is increased by 10 degrees outside of chase. Not great, but it can help you spot that blendette that's trying to crawl just out of line of sight, figuring he can't see me over here. And then when you get into chase, your terror radius gets increased by 8 meters. A lot of people said this works great with furtive chase. Those people are idiots because furtive chase decreases your terror radius in chase, and this increases it, so you lose that benefit pretty much. What this is a great sneak attack perk. This works well on low terror radius killers to make them even more sneaky, and it works well on large terror radius killers to make them an extra little bit sneaky. It all depends on whether or not you feel you need to use it. If you want to run a sneak attack build, this is a great perk to have. Other than that, there's no value to it. Monstrous Shrine. Oh god, we have another contender for worst perk of the game. This is such a garbage perk. The way it works is it affects your basement hooks and it makes them more powerful. Considering the basement is already like one of the strongest places in the game that the killer has, it is the strongest point on any map in the game. You don't really need to run this perk to make it better. Some killers take advantage of basement better than others. Billy, Bubba, Spirit, Nurse, Trapper, Hag, Demogorgon, they take advantage of the basement better than most of the other killers in the game can. So you don't really need Monstrous Shrine. And if you're running somebody like a Wraith, it's not going to help. Basically, it makes it so that the person on a hook, their bar goes down 9% faster. there is a 9% reduced penalty, or a 15% increased penalty on trying to unhook, which starts at 4%, so this effectively removes it unless they're running like Vigos, and even then, if you're running a Vigo Jar of Salty Lips, this will cut your escape opportunity from 25 to 10, considering you're probably not getting off the hook. Anyways, this also makes the penalty increase on failing to escape, which means they only get 2 unhook opportunities instead of 1. I'm sorry, they get 2 unhook opportunities instead of 3. Or they, whatever, you get what I'm saying. This perk isn't worth being run, though, simply because you're not going to need it. If you're running a basement build, you want to run perks that help you get them in the basement, or slow them down so that you can get them in the basement. When they're in the basement, this perk doesn't need to be run. Period. The next perk that we have is Nemesis. Nemesis is a very strong perk. It's a B tier perk. It's one of the best obsession perks in the game. What it does is whenever you are stunned or blinded, you become the obsession. Whenever a survivor stuns or blinds you, they become the obsession. So, flashlights, flashbangs, head-on, decisive, pallet stun. Common survivor defenses. Now, that person gets the oblivious effect for 60 seconds and becomes a new obsession. This lets you move the obsession around while chasing a survivor. They're very strong. Yes, you have to endure a certain penalty in order to get it to work. However, it's worth it. If you need to move the obsession around, this perk is fantastic. It also makes their aura shown to you for 4 seconds. Sometimes that's worthless. That's the part of this that could maybe be buffed. The main benefit is that it causes the obsession to be moved. Unlike Furtive Chase, though, it has a much more stronger benefit. The survivor becomes oblivious for 60 seconds. And this means if they do not have line of sight on you, the killer, they do not know where you are. Which means that it forces, you can moonwalk them a lot easier at a pallet, because they're not going to hear where you are, unless they're paying attention to footsteps. I think this works well on stealthy killers, or killers who don't make too much noise. If you're running an Oni or Demogorgon, who's going bum, 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 with their footsteps, this loses some of its effective value. But if you're running a character with low footsteps, like Mike, oh god, that just needs the ass perk. I would like it if it just deafened the survivors as well. If it deafened them for that 60-second duration, I think this would make it an A meta tier perk. But for right now, because it's a bit of a meme build, it's just a strong meme build, it's in B tier. Overcharge is going to be another perk that's in B tier. This is a decent slowdown perk. It makes it where you kick a generator. The next time a survivor touches it, they get a very difficult skill check to hit. If they hit it, they get no bonus. So it's a very nerve-wracking experience. If they don't hit it, it results in 5% gen regression, which is 15% in total, because they failed the skill check. So that's 15% of a gen gone. Of the gen's progress, I should say. Gone, because of failing that. It also gives the loud noise notification from them fucking up the gen. What the value of this is that it not only allows you to regress a gen a little bit, it lets you know what gen is being touched to go over and kick it again. And because if they hit or fail the skill check, it instantly removes it so that you can then kick it again. Even if they fail it, you can still kick it and reapply it. So, this is a decent tracking perk, letting you track gens. The downsides to this perk are that A, you have to kick the generator, and B, if they hit the skill check, it negates the purpose of this. It's a more difficult to do it for survivors. Even good survivors like myself who can hit great skill checks all the time can still miss it, especially if you're not expecting it. This can be a one and done type perk. The other thing as well is if you're not in a survive with friends, they're just gonna think they blew the generator for no reason. This perk mostly comes down to your ability to use it and the survivor's ability to hit it. So it's going to be a B tier perk. It is relatively strong. We have Play With Your Food. I'm going to put Play With Your Food in the C tier. I'm not a fan of this perk, but it does its job, and I can't complain. This basically is a way to speed up your killers over the course of a game. This works great for slow killers to give them short bursts of speed to win chases better if they can't use their power, which is why they're a slower killer in the first place, like Nurse, Huntress, Hag, Spirit, etc. And it also works well on killers who don't have movement abilities but are base speed, like Wraith and Bubba, because they're going to be able to get more value and actually catch survivors easier with their power. The way it works is you become obsessed with one survivor. Every time you chase your obsession and let them escape, which you just make them sprint away from you and then look away for 3 seconds, you receive a token, up to 3 tokens. Each token gives you 5% movement speed. This can give you an additional 15% movement speed. And then each offensive action, that would be swinging, whether you hit or miss, or using certain powers. So hatchets on Huntress or chainsaw on Billy Bubba will remove a token, whether you hit or miss. That's important to note. Just using any damaging ability will consume a token. That makes missing much more critical. The main advantage is that on a slower killer, it's designed to actually work with a tier 1 Myers, by the way, that letting your obsession go, you can farm it. The downside of this perk is that you're going to spend a good 30 seconds farming chase from your obsession so that you can get your maximum stacks, and you can lose those stacks so easily. And then you have to go out and farm them again. It's a good perk if you're confident in your ability to rapidly down survivors as well, because you can unload all 3 tokens on an exposed effect killer, get 3 people down, and hook them, and now just go chase your obsession while they're trying to get the unhooks. It can work in situations like that. I think the main value is for killers who need that movement speed buff. The next perk that we have is One Pop Goes the Weasel. This is an A meta tier perk. This, right now, is the #1 gen defense perk in the game. This makes it so that whenever you hook a survivor, you are given 60 seconds to go kick a generator. When you kick that generator, it instantly regresses the generator by 25% of its maximum progress. It says total progress, that's incorrect. It's actually the maximum progress of the gen. You are removing 25% of the generator, period. Normal generator regression applies after that 25%. So it'll start ticking away. It'll take 4 seconds to reduce it by 1 second after that point. That's not the point, though. You are immediately reducing the generator by 20 seconds. That's the way you need to look at it. You are a solo survivor. You are reducing the generator by 20 seconds just by kicking it. And that's insane, just for hooking the survivor. You can use this on a generator that's been started, but isn't like near 50% to regress it down to nothing. You can use this on a generator that's near completion in order to knock it down and make it harder for them to complete. This is right now the top anti-gen perk in the game for gen speed. All you have to do is hook a survivor, which is your ultimate goal anyways, and then you get to slow the game down a little bit. The issue with Pop is twofold. One, certain perks don't work with it. For example, Surge. Surge will completely remove Pop Goes the Weasel. You don't get the value of it. It's a weird perk interaction, but it negates your ability to combo certain perks. In addition to that, this perk is only active for 60 seconds. If you decide to chase a survivor for 60 seconds instead of kicking a gen, you lose the perk pretty much. The next perk we have is Rancor. This is another A meta tier perk in my opinion. Rancor is a very interesting perk because in my opinion, there's no real negative to the perk other than not using it. What this perk does is it makes it so that you are obsessed with one survivor. Every time a generator is completed, your aura is revealed to that obsession. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing. Yes, they know where you are, and this is a survive with friend. First off, as a stealth, if you're playing a stealth killer, or if the survivor is running Dark Sense, they will literally not know that you are running Rancor. That's the first thing I want to mention. So, a survivor perk, or playing a specific survivor, completely negates the downside of this. That's why I say there's no real negative to this. And, even if they do see your aura, that actually works to your benefit sometimes. You see, the effects that Rancor gives to you regarding your obsession is that when all of the generators have been completed, that obsession has the exposed effect. So they're one shot. And you can mori them. You know what that means? That obsession's leaving. They're not staying around. This is not Noed. You can't cleanse this and get rid of it. You have to leave if you want to remove this. And because this is an obsession perk, and you can move the obsession around with Furtive and Nemesis, this makes it possible to get multiple Rancors in one game. Which is evil. In addition to that, well, why would I run a perk that lets me just mori one person? Oh, because it also reveals survivors' locations for 3 seconds. Each time a generator is completed. Now, this to me is stronger than Bitter Murmur. The reason for this is it reveals all survivors' locations on the map to you. Not just the ones around the generator. Now, yes, this is the notification bubble like Infectious Fright, and it stays on the screen for 3 seconds. However, the value of this is it lets you know where a survivor is. All you need to know is know where they are. You're going to know where one survivor is when they are popping a gen, and you're going to know where one survivor is if you're chasing them. But it lets you know where the other 2 survivors are. This allows you, if one is nearby, to rapidly change targets and apply more pressure potentially. It's a decent anti-gen tracking perk that rewards you if you fail. It's also an anti-altruistic perk. It makes the survivor who is the obsession decide to leave half the time. The next perk that we have is Remember Me. I'm going to give Remember Me a C tier rating. This is an obsession perk. You become obsessed with one survivor. When you hit that survivor with a basic attack, it increases the opening of the exit gates by 4 seconds for each token, up to 4 tokens. So basically, this can double the amount of time it takes to open an exit gate. It's a great slowdown perk for the end of the game to buy you some more time to defend the gates. The risk is that A, the obsession is not affected by Remember Me. That's one thing. You want to make sure you kill the obsession. B, it's not that great of a perk. You're generally off better running a perk that... a stronger perk. It's similar to like Wake Up versus Adrenaline argument, where something like Noed or Blood Warden is a stronger perk to run during endgame than this. And it's similar in that, well, you're better off running another perk. But it's a nice way to see if you to buy yourself a little bit more time to get to confirm a kill, especially if you close hatch and there's only one survivor left and they're not the obsession. This is basically a guarantee that they're not getting the gate open and getting out in time. If they're camping a gate waiting to open it and you close hatch on the other side, this can buy you enough time to potentially get them off the door. Other than that, it's a pretty situational perk. It works better with other perks like Noed and Blood Warden. So, it's a C tier perk. Save the best for last. This is the second of the 3 meta perks that I will shit on. This is a D tier perk for me. I'm sorry. It is. What this perk does, I'm going to explain this a little bit in detail. So I'm going to drink some coffee real quick. Hold on. What this perk does is it's an obsession perk. I know, we're talking a lot about this. But it's good that there's more perks than we have. When I came into the game, there were like no obsession perks. Mike was the only one with obsession perks, and then they released Spirit, and that added Rancor. And like, then they've added perks since then, and I'm like, oh, that's nice. You're finally buffing a mechanic that I rather enjoyed when I came into the game. Like, literally, it was just Laurie's perks and Mike's perks. That was it. Anyways, the way this works is that each time you hit a non-obsession with a basic attack, your recovery from that attack goes up. So this is a 5% successful cooldown for each stack up to 8 tokens. That means that you can have a 40% reduced cooldown from successfully hitting them. This lets you, basically, this cuts down the amount of time you're inspecting your weapon from 2 seconds down to, we'll call it 1 second, just to roughly round it, 1 second. However, when you hit your obsession with a basic attack, you will lose 2 tokens. So every time you'll lose 10% every time you hit your obsession. But it only applies off of basic attacks. So if you're using an ability that is not a basic attack, like Legion's Feral Frenzy, or Chainsaw, a Hatchet, Red Puke, etc., it doesn't apply. Which means you're encouraged to go after the obsession with your power and M1 the rest of the survivors. You no longer gain or lose tokens if your obsession is killed. That's the key. So if you have the maximum amount of stacks and you kill the obsession, you have 40% decreased cooldown. There's a big glaring problem with this, and I'm actually going to show you something here. What this does, first off, Trapper, Billy, Huntress, Bubba, Pig, Plague, and Demogorgon is who it works on. And I want to mention that. The reason why I'm mentioning that, those killers are encouraged not to use their power on the other 3 survivors, and to go after just the one person who is the obsession with their power. You are essentially running this perk saying, I am not using my power for this game, except on this one person. Therefore, all of your add-ons are completely worthless. Okay? Now, yes, it makes you a much faster M1 killer. And if you have an exposed effect, you can still use your M1 on the obsession, because you're only going to lose 1 stack. That's why Legion works well with it. It can work well with it as well, because he can hit the obsession with Feral Frenzy, cancel it, and then M1 them to just lose 1 stack. Or 10%. It's actually 2 stacks, but whatever. The problem with this perk for me is I do not want to run a perk that discourages me from using my power on anybody. Period. That is the main drawback to Dying Light, is that it's not affected by one person. While on this, you're not using it on one person. And on M1 killers, who probably need this cooldown reduction in successful basic attack the most, they get the least value out of it. Because if you don't have that exposed effect, guess what? You have to waste 50% of your maximum tokens just to down that one survivor. I hate this perk and everything it stands for. It has a strong enough benefit where I can't call it a garbage tier perk, but it is not worth the perk slot. It is not worth it. You should be willing to play around your power against an obsession. I'm sorry. Shadowborn. This is a B tier perk. It's similar to Agitation and Brutal Strength. If you think it's worth the perk slot, go ahead and run it. It increases your FOV by 15 degrees. So your field of view is slightly larger than normal. This makes it easier for you to track. It makes it harder for survivors to loop you or try and juke you with line of sight in open maps. It does not stack with Monitor and Abuse. I think that's important to note. If it did, that'd be pretty broken. But it's a solid perk to run. If you don't mind running a perk slot to basically just increase the size of your screen a little bit, that's basically what it does for you. It increases the size of your screen, because you can't change that as a killer. So, I think this should be a setting and not necessarily a perk. But it's a handy perk to have. A lot of aim-dependent killers like Nurse and Huntress really do rely on this perk, believe it or not. So, I would say this is a lot stronger. I would say try it one or two games, see how different your gameplay changes on that killer, and decide if it's worth running. The next perk we have is Spies from the Shadows, and this perk has actually received an overhaul over the years to where it's actually a B tier perk. The way this perk works is whenever a survivor triggers a crow, or you trigger a crow, you get a visual notification in the shape of a crow whenever you're within a 36-meter range of it. It has a 5-second cooldown, which is pretty worthless. That's non-existent. But the fact of the matter is, basically, survivors just randomly running through the environment will trigger this. It works very well on maps with large amounts of crows. Swamp, Hawkins, Lurries, etc. This works very well on maps where survivors are going to have to trigger a crow. Crows will normally spawn on lockers, hooks, generators, things they need to interact with. This triggers it. Basically, this is a tracking perk that 90% of the survivors in the game will not pay attention to or be able to counter, because you can only counter this with Calm Spirit. Or Crouch Walking. So Blendette can counter it. That's about it. This perk is a very strong perk to run. It is basically a free tracking perk, but it requires you knowing how to use it more than anything. Next perk that we have is Surveillance. Surveillance is a B tier perk. It is a decent generator detection perk. What it does is, whenever a regressing generator is interrupted, what that means is whenever a generator starts touching a gen that's regressing, it will be highlighted in yellow for 16 seconds. The other benefit is that the noise created by generators are 8 meters. You can hear it from 8 meters away. Further, that's not really noticeable. It's not like with Technician, where, you know, that is a stronger benefit. You don't really need that. The main benefit for this is that it lets you know when survivors are touching your gens. You can combo this with Ruin. You can combo this with any regression perk, such as, you know, Pop or Overcharge. And it lets you know when they're touching it. Overcharge and Surveillance is actually a lot nastier than people think, because if they hit the skill check for Overcharge, the gen stops regressing. You know what that means? You get a notification no matter what. This is pretty much a must-have if you're trying to run Ruin as well. I want to mention that. This perk is incredibly strong. I think a lot of people don't give this perk the credit. It's a great 3-gen perk, because if you're just bouncing between the 3 generators, kicking them and regressing them, it lets you know whenever one of them is touched. The key to this perk is that you have to take the time to kick the generator. Or you have to take the time to pressure the survivor off the generator. If the generator doesn't regress, the perk doesn't work. Other than that, though, very strong perk, but it requires your knowledge. Territorial Imperative, this is a garbage time perk. It has no significant benefit to the game. What it does, first off, let's start that for such a shitty garbage tier perk, the fact that it has a fucking cooldown on it is ridiculous to me. That's just a slap in the fucking face for no reason. Anytime a survivor goes into the basement, and you are 32 meters away from the basement, their auras are revealed to you for 3 seconds. Mind you, this does not work if they're above the basement, working on the generator above it. This is not like entering shaft or main building. This is if they go into the basement. Mind you, this does not work if they are on the stairs. They actually have to round the corner to the second flight of stairs for this to work. Mind you, this does not work if you're within 32 meters of the basement in the first place, in which case the survivor is more than likely not going to the basement unless they absolutely have to. Mind you that this is an aura reveal and is countered by distortion, and you are not going to be able to take advantage unless you are a fucking hag, or a demogorgon, or a billy, or a spirit, or a nurse. And you have a way to instantly just zoom and fucking instant transmission your ass over to the damn basement and go, hello there, and fucking Obi-Wan Kenobi them. This perk is worthless. And the fact that it has a cooldown on top of that is a slap in the face. Don't run this perk. Next, we have Thanatophobia. I am giving this perk an A tier slot. I am doing it because right now it is one of the strongest perks in the game. It is not the best perk in the game, but you have to understand this is one of 2 perks in the game to feature a repair speed slowdown. And comparing to Dying Light, it is far superior. However, it requires less work in my opinion, but it's still, the survivors can counter this. The way it works is that each survivor who is injured, dying, or hooked gives you a 4% penalty in repair, healing, and sabotage. Individually, one injured survivor, for example, this is not all that significant, and is pretty easy to work through and counter. However, the effect stacks up significantly when you get 3 or 4 survivors affected by this. On killers who are able to keep survivors rapidly injured, rapidly downed, having multiple survivors on hook at a time, or just able to force a survivor to stay injured, this perk becomes significant. If the survivor doesn't have a way to heal and remove the Cloraphobia, the survivor has to deal with that constant penalty, in addition to being one-shot for the rest of the game. This forces the survivors to waste time and heal, and it slows them down doing this. This can be comboed with so many different perks. You can combo this with Pop to regress gens quicker. They repair slower, and you have instant regression from hooking them. You can combo this off of killers like Plague and Legion, who you're not going to heal up against, who are going to keep you injured for a long duration. This works great against exposed effect killers, because if they're running Dead Hard, they're going to want to keep Dead Hard in play, so they're going to stay injured, and they're going to eat the slowdown. This works great with Sloppy Butcher and Cloraphobia, letting you slow down healing even further. This works great with Nurses, so you can track those people. This works great with Barbecue, so you can isolate people who are injured and trying to work through it. There are so many perks that this work with. The only downside to this perk is it requires you as the killer to keep the pressure on the survivor to keep them from healing. If the survivor heals, you lose the benefit of it. Period. And sometimes it's just simply not noticeable. Next perk we have is Thrilling Tremors. This is a... this is an A tier perk. Fuck it. I love this perk. I'm giving Thrilling Tremors the nod to A tier. I'm sorry. I think this is one of the strongest perks in the game right now. The way this works is whenever you pick up a survivor, all generators that are not being worked on are blocked for 16 seconds, and those generators are highlighted to you. Yes, it does have a 60-second cooldown. It would be broken if it didn't. Let's start right there. I would say I would like this perk better. If they wanted to drop the duration down to maybe 10 seconds where it's blocked, I could deal with that if I could reduce the cooldown and say the way it's stacked was 60, 50, 40 for tiers 1, 2, and 3. But I will eat a 60-second cooldown. Whatever. Perfectly fine. Basically, picking up a survivor, carrying them to a hook, and hooking them makes it so that survivors who get off of generators, I'm going to get the pallet save, I'm going to get the flashlight save, leave that 99% gen blocked, and they can't touch it. And because the generator is now blocked, it gives me two things. One, I'm running Pop Goes the Weasel. I know this generator is blocked, they can't work on it. This generator is being worked on. I can go chase them off and potentially activate other perks like Deadman Switch, Cloraphobia. And of course, it lets me know what generators I should and shouldn't be kicking. For example, if I know that they were working on a generator, I know I can kick that with Pop. Now you can counter this perk quite easily as a survivor by staying on the gen when they get picked up. But you're losing valuable time if you need to get into position for Sabo, Body Block, Flashlight, Pallet, Insta-Heal. You're losing so much time. The 60-second cooldown can also be triggered as well. For example, if a survivor is AFK, you can just pick them up and then drop them to activate this effect, go chase somebody else for 60 seconds, and then come back and pick them up again. So it's not necessarily a hindrance. Considering right now, knowing if you know how to use this perk, it's one of the premium slowdown perks for gens right now, in my opinion. It's basically barbecue and chili on a generator. It's a strong perk. The next perk we're going to talk about is Tinker. I will give this perk some love. I will put this in B tier. I think it can potentially be A tier. I think it can potentially be C tier. What it does is whenever a generator reaches 85%, you are given a loud noise notification at that generator, and you are given undetectable for 12 seconds. They cannot stealth. You lose your terror radius, your red stain, you become complete stealth. This has two main benefits. On killers with map pressure, who are able to quickly get over to generators, it enables you to sneakily defend a generator. Billy, Nurse, Spirit, Demogorgon, Hag, whatever. You can immediately get over to the generator and stop it. On a killer who can't travel the map, you don't have that benefit. And that's really where it sucks. If you can't pressure the gen when it hits 85%, the only value is in the second effect, the undetectable effect. And that is critical. If survivors are trying to pop a gen and you're being stealthy in chase, if you're in chase with another survivor, that 12 seconds of stealth can result in a down. And that can be critical. Now, trading a generator, which there are 5 of, for a down, for a hook, which there are 12 of, is not necessarily a good trade. However, that hook, if you can get the hook off of Tinker, now forces another survivor to get that hook. So you now have 2 survivors monopolized off of this one perk. Maybe not the best thing of the world, but having random undetectable effect can be a valuable thing as long as you know where a survivor is. So, again, this perk is very strong as long as you know how to use it. I think the potential benefit of it outweighs the potential downside of it, so use it at your own peril. Unrelenting, this is an absolute garbage tier perk. There's no value to this perk. This perk is... it makes it so that you recover from missed attacks 30% faster. Your missed attack recovery is already slower than your fast recovery, so you don't really need to run this. And in addition to that, your missed attack is not necessarily the easiest thing. Unless you are afraid of whiffing dead hard and you want to recover from that a little bit faster, yeah, run Unrelenting. Sure, go ahead. It's a waste of a perk slot. Just hit your target. Next, we have Whispers. Whispers is one of the premium tracking perks in the game. It can give you so much fucking knowledge, but you have to know how to use it. And because of how high skill it is to know how to use Whispers, it is a B tier perk. It is not an A tier perk. First off, this perk does nothing more than just light up on your screen. Okay? Think of this as Spine Chill for killers without any of the other benefits that Spine Chill has. Basically, as long as you are standing within 32 meters of a survivor, this perk highlights. Well, what does that mean for you? Well, that means if a survivor is within a 32-meter circle of you, it highlights. Now, if they're on hook, if they're downed, if they're in a locker, where you either aren't going to find them anyways if they're in a locker, or if you already know where they are because they're down or they're on a hook, this perk doesn't do much for you. It's a trap. However, if you don't know where a survivor is, this perk is very helpful for tracking. Basically, this lets you guide and say, okay, somebody's here. Let's take a minute. Let's look around. And it's basically a game of hot-cold for killer. But considering how killer plays is a game of hot and cold anyways, it's a strong perk. You will get no value out of this if you're not paying attention to your HUD and you don't know how this perk works. If you know how to use this perk, it's one of the best in the game. We are going to be talking about Bamboozle. This is another B-tier perk. I have a lot of B-tier perks. I think a lot of perks in the game can be viable. They're just simply not good. They're like niches where they provide a benefit. Bamboozle's like that. First off, you vault 15% faster. It's not enough to, like, vault at the same speed that a survivor does. Let's get that out the way. But it does mitigate one of the bigger penalties. The other thing it does is it makes it so that the entity blocks the vault location for 16 seconds. For all survivors. It's blocked. Now, you can only block one location at a time. What's the value of this perk? Well, one is it completely cuts out re-looping. And two, it forces you to get pallets out the way. Why is that important? Shack is one of them. Shack and Infinites are the most common places where this perk gets value. In a place where there is no mind game, or in the case of Shack, where the killer can continue to loop and loop and loop and loop and loop and loop, then get 3 loops and then throw pallet and then get 3 loops and then leave, you can cut that down with this perk. It blocks the window for 16 seconds. That does 2 things. It forces them to leave that window and find another, or it forces them to find a pallet and use it, or loop the pallet. This perk works great in forcing the survivor to leave a safe spot. That's what this perk does. It cuts down on your downtime from vaulting, and it forces them to leave a safe spot and go to another one. If you want them to waste pallets, this is the perk for you. We have Beast of Prey. This is a D tier perk for me. This is D tier. It has some use, but the use is not particularly great. So first off, this is a blood point farm. You get 50% more blood points for actions in the hunting category. It also, that's one of the main benefits, but that's pretty weak. What it does is whenever you hit Bloodlust Tier 1, which is being in a chase with the same survivor for 15 seconds, you gain the undetectable status effect. However, once you lose Bloodlust, which can be done by breaking a pallet or losing line of sight for 3 seconds, well, this is gone. So basically this makes you have no terror radius or red stain while in chase. Now, this can be significant because it's better than reducing terror radius. However, the fact that you have to be in a chase for 15 seconds means that you're wasting a lot of precious time that you might not have to get a very small benefit. Yes, it can usually confirm you a hit or a down, but you have to waste too much of your time to get the benefit. And if you are... It only really works if the survivor doesn't have line of sight, in making a mind game a lot easier, because of the fact that if the survivor has line of sight on you, it's still pretty much worthless. And the third of the perks that I love to shit on, this is my D tier perk as well, where everyone says it's a great perk, and I would like to contradict that. Corrupt Intervention. Corrupt Intervention is a D tier perk. What this perk does is it makes it so the 3 generators that are furthest from you at the start of the game are blocked for 2 minutes. They cannot be repaired. The fact that they are highlighted by a white aura means nothing. Ignore that. The main benefit of this is that it forces the survivors to come to you to work on generators, or they waste 2 minutes of their time on the other half of the map. It also means that half of the map, you know, is not going to be worked on. There are 2 issues with this for me, and they are big issues. 1, the survivors can just sit on the other half of the map for 2 minutes. They can search all the chests on that map. They can search all the totems and cleanse them on that map. Which, that may seem like a secondary objective, but mind you, if you're staying on your side of the map and just patrolling the 4 gens that the survivors have to work on, the survivors have no incentive. As long as they're moving around and not having idle crows above their head, there is no reason for them to leave that side of the map. Now, there's the second issue. How do we counter that? Well, as the killer, you can then go and patrol those 3 gens that are blocked. Now all the survivors go onto the half of the map and can start working on generators. Not to mention, this perk only works for 2 minutes. If you don't get someone, at least one person on hook, and I mean on hook. I'm not talking about injured. I'm not talking about down. I'm about on motherfucking hook. In that 2 minutes, good luck. One good survivor that can loop you is going to negate this perk. You not finding a survivor is going to negate this perk. You running a totem build of any kind of a totem perk negates this perk. The survivors running a chest build negates this perk. You leaving the 4 gens that they can work on negates this perk. This perk is essentially a good perk for 2 killers. The Trapper, well, 3. I'll say 3. The Trapper, the Hag, and the Demogorgon, because it lets them set up their traps and their portals on the half of the map that they want to protect, and 3 gen. This perk is a late game perk that you start in the first 2 minutes of the game, and the survivors can completely ignore it if you do not set up in those first 2 minutes. So if you are not a setup based killer, good luck. Have fun with your wasted perk slot. I love seeing Corrupt Intervention when I'm playing Survivor, because I know one of their perk slots is wasted. Next we have Deerstalker. This is a D tier perk. What it does is effective, let's get that straight. Deerstalker makes it so that you can see dying survivors' auras within 36 meters. This is a slug perk, which means if you slug them and go to chase somebody else, you can come back and know for a fact where they are. It is also not countered by distortion. It is one of only 2 aura reveals in the game that is not countered by distortion. However, there's a problem with this. You don't need Deerstalker to track dying survivors. You just need ears. You just need to be able to track with sound. As soon as you get out of mid-tier killer play, this perk becomes worthless to you, because you're already used to tracking scratch marks, blood, and sound. So you don't need this perk at all. It's helpful for a general idea if it's a hatch standoff, and you have 2 people slugged, and you know where the hatch is, and one person's crawled away, and you don't want to let them crawl over to the hatch, maybe. That's about it. Discordance. This is a great A-tier perk. This is meta. What it does is anytime 2 survivors get on a gen, the gen's aura is highlighted in yellow. It's a free tunnel me daddy sign on a generator, pretty much. This perk works in a great way. 2 survivors touch a gen, you know to go over it and chase them off that gen. The key here is it doesn't matter how long they're on the gen. As long as 2 survivors touch the gen at the same time, it pops up. Now, if you're in chase with the survivor, you're generally not getting value out of this. But it's a great way at the start of a game to find out where the survivors spawn. If multiple survivors spawn together and start working on the gen at the same time, there you go. You've got a starting point for chase. And in a 3 gen, if the survivors try and bum rush through it faster to get out, this lets you know, hey, I need to go chase them off of there, which is going to force them to work on gens individually and a lot slower, buying you more time to patrol. There's no downside to running this, and it's also one of the only perks in the game that you want to keep at tier 1 because of the fact that the notification pops up every 8 seconds as opposed to every 12 seconds. So it gives you even better knowledge at tier 1 than tier 3. We have Enduring. I'm going to put this in B tier. This is the first time it's being put in B tier. The reason why I'm putting it in B tier is for the fact that so many killers now run this perk and don't even use it, because they try and mind game the pallet. The way it works is the duration of pallet stuns is cut in half, from 2 seconds to 1. This enables you to eat pallets so fast, there's no downside to running this perk because it lets you counter a survivor defense. The downside to this is if you try and avoid pallet stuns, if you're trying to bait them out, if you're trying to hit them over it, if you're trying to mind game them, this perk has no value. And that's why it's not an A tier. The fact that it does not counter any other types of stuns, it only counters pallet stuns, is also enough for me to drop it down to B tier. It's a great perk to run to save you time, but that's all it is. Next we have Fire Up. I will give Fire Up some love. I will put it in the C tier. Fire Up is a good perk. It's not a great perk. It's a helpful perk. The way it works is that every time a generator is completed, you gain a 4% stackable buff to a lot of other categories for the remainder of the game. Now this means with all 5 generators complete, you get a 20% bonus. That bonus applies to breaking pallets and generators. That applies to dropping and picking up and dropping survivors, and that applies to vaulting. Now, the picking up and dropping survivors, this is the only perk in the game that actually does that. That lets you cut down on that downtime. It's not particularly long. It's a second apiece. But it can be helpful. You cut 20%, it's 0.2 seconds. It's not a lot, but, you know, it's there. The key benefit is for vaulting and breaking. This perk can take the place of Brutal Strength and Bamboozle. It's actually stronger than Bamboozle at tier 4, at 4 tokens. And it's the same as Brutal at 5 tokens. The downside is you have to lose all 5 gens to get this. So if you're not losing generators, this perk doesn't fill up. But it progressively makes you stronger in endgame, which is a key thing. If you're trying to desperately get kills during endgame, this can negate a lot of defenses. And it can be out of nowhere if the survivor who has been gen rushing you the entire game gets into chase for the first time at the end of the game, and all of a sudden you are fast as fuck breaking pallets and vaulting windows. Yeah, they're gonna have a hard time countering that. But at the end of the game, at the end of the day, it's just a minuscule amount that you get, because over the course of the game, you know, when there's only 2 or 3 gens done, so you only have 4 or 8% bonus, it's not great. It's something, but it's not great. It's pretty much an endgame perk. The next perk that we have is Gearhead. This, in my opinion, is a D tier perk. I could make an argument for it being E tier. I think the benefit is strong enough. It's right now the worst of the tracking perks involving generators. So, first off, you have to hit a survivor twice with your basic attack. Again, this takes a lot of killers out of the equation. This is going to take out, you know, your Huntresses, your Billies, your Bubbas, your Demogorgons, your Legions. But you hit a survivor twice with your basic attack, and then after you hit them the second time, it automatically activates for 30 seconds. This means if you hit a survivor and injure them, and then chase another survivor and injure them, and you continue chasing that second survivor, you lose the effect pretty much, because that's 30 seconds it's ticking down, where you're chasing the other survivor. This also doesn't work if you hit a survivor for your first stack, and then down the survivor with your second stack, and then pick them up and hook them, because you've now lost a good 10 to 15 seconds of this perk as well. So realistically, you do not get any time to use this perk, but That's okay. We'll talk about this later. When Gearhead is active, good luck. Each time a survivor completes a good skill check. This does not work if they fail the skill check. This does not work if they don't get a skill check. This does not work if they get a great skill check. This only works if they hit a good skill check. So there's a 25% chance that this perk even activates. While active, the generator is then revealed to you in yellow as long as it's being repaired. But for 30 seconds. If the generator will be revealed to you in yellow as long as it's being repaired, lasted past the 30 seconds of Gearhead, this perk could actually maybe have some value. You could know if a survivor was just staying on a generator to completion. However, this perk is so bad. It is the worst of the gen detection perks, but considering a gen detection perk is still a good thing to have, if you don't have Rancor, Discordance, Bitter Murmur, Thrilling Tremors, Deadman Switch, what else do I have here that could be used? Did I name all of them that I've covered so far? Overcharge, Huntress Lullaby, Surveillance, Tinker, Ruin, kind of ish. Maybe you can. If you don't have any of those perks, yeah, you can run this perk, sure. But that's about it. Hangman's Trick. This perk has been nerfed into the ground. It was shit. It was E tier. Then it got buffed up to C tier on the PTB. And now it's pretty much in the D tier. It's in the middle. It's in between where it was on PTB and where it was before PTB. So basically, this perk actually worsened in that it used to restore hooks that were removed from the game because of sacrifice 10 seconds later. Well, it no longer does that. So this perk did lose a significant benefit. However, right now, the way the perk works is not great either. You gain a notification whenever a survivor begins saboing a hook. Considering how fast hooks are saboed, it's not worth it. The key is, while carrying a survivor, you see the aura of any survivors within 6 meters of a hook. So it lets you know whenever a survivor is going to sabo a hook ahead of time, so you can turn and run. It also works anywhere on the map, so if a survivor is randomly just next to a hook on the other side of the map, it lets you see that while you're carrying the survivor. Usually, however, when you're carrying a survivor, you're not paying attention to shit like that, so this perk loses all value. I mean, the fact that it is an aura tracking perk, and you don't have to do much to activate it, makes it kind of good. I would say that's about it. That's why it's D tier. It's still not, it's not E. It's good enough. Hex Thrill of the Hunt. This is the last of the Hex perks. Rewind this about an hour to see what Hex perks do. Basically, the way this works is that this perk has 1 token for every dull and hex totem remaining on the map. So that means that you start the game with 5 tokens, and then every time they cleanse one, you lose 1. But it starts with 5 tokens. For each token, the survivor's cleansing speed of totems is reduced by 6%. That means that at the start of the game, it takes a survivor 30% longer to cleanse a totem. They also get a notification whenever someone is working on a hex totem. Now, this was nerfed. This used to be on a totem, including dull ones. So this really only works in a maximum totem build. Because the survivor, the killer, doesn't get a notification when you're touching a dull totem, that means the survivors really only have the drawback of just cleansing a dull totem. It takes them a little bit longer, but by doing it, they're now shorting up the next one. Think about it. Let's say that you're running 3 hex totems, right? Okay? So cleansing those 2 totems means now it's 18% instead of 30% longer to cleanse that hex totem. That's a pretty big speed bonus if you're trying to protect it. You also get 10% more blood points for each token in the hunting category. Therefore, that's 50% more actions in more blood points in the hunting category for at the start of the game, and then that progressively goes down. So you can use it for a blood point farm, and you can use it as a protection perk. I say all of this because this perk ultimately just winds up in C tier. The fact that this perk no longer protects dull totems, weakens its value out of C tier. Because you can no longer use this perk to protect Noed if they get rid of it at the beginning of the game. If they get rid of Thrill of the Hunt before it activates, then there's no point to running this perk. The only thing that's really good about it is that it makes Survivor, and on top of that, I shouldn't say it's a good thing. It makes survivors want to cleanse totems, knowing there's Thrill of the Hunt, because they're going to assume you're protecting something. So if you're running this to protect Noed, you're actually hurting yourself, because they're just going to cleanse more and more totems. However, I will note that each time you lose a token, if you're paying attention to the screen, you're noticing, they touched my totems. So it lets you know that they're actively looking for totems, and that you can maybe patrol spots where there are totems. The next perk we're going to run is I'm All Ears. This is an awesome B tier perk. You could maybe call it A tier, but I think there's enough drawbacks. Basically, whenever a survivor performs a fast vault within 48 meters of you, their aura is revealed to you for 6 seconds. It does have a 40-second cooldown, which is pretty much the big trade-off. And as a stealth killer, they're not going to be doing this unless they're trying to break chase. It is a great mind game break chase type perk. If they try and fast vault around a corner away from you, you can see where they're at. And if they fast vault over a vault and then round a corner to a pallet and try and camp it, this perk gives you so much information as what they're doing and how to mind game them for the next few seconds. I would say the only issue with this perk is the cooldown on it. The 40-second cooldown negates it from being A tier. But it's a free tracking perk every time you get into a chase with somebody, pretty much. If you're getting into a chase every 30 to 40 seconds with survivors, this is a great perk to have. There's no real downside. It's an aura reveal, too. Next, we have Iron Grasp. This is a C tier perk. It does its job. If you're going for a basement build and you want to make sure they get into the basement, this works. If you're afraid of body blocking or people wiggling off, this is great. If you're afraid of Sabo, this is great. Other than that, it doesn't really have any value. Basically, the survivors cannot wiggle out of your grasp. This increases the time it takes by 12%, which means you can take them to farther hooks, and their struggling effects are reduced by 75% while carrying them. That's pretty much minuscule. The main benefit is that it takes them longer to wiggle out. So the key is that it pretty much confirms the hook. Unless you're somebody's body blocking or saboing, even then, you can still get around this. Other than that, there's no real reason to run it. The hooks on the map, they're usually spaced close enough together. The real value is if you plan on downing people on a certain part of the map and they're going to be sacrificed, so you gradually start losing hooks on the side of the map. If somebody goes down and there's 2 broken hooks near you that you can't use, this perk will help you get them to a safe hook. That's about all the perk's good for. On to the last page we go, and this is actually mostly full of shit perks. There's a few good ones in here, but that's very rare. First off, we have Knockout. This is a C tier perk. This is an aura hindering perk, so it's going in C tier for that build. What it does is it's actually a bit of a stealth perk, believe it or not. It makes it where dying survivors' auras are not revealed to other survivors if they are further than 16 meters away. This means they have to be very close to the killer to know where you are. The main value of this is if the survivor is not running something like empathy or aftercare to track where that survivor went down, this perk is kind of a stealth perk. If you're outside of the killer's terror radius, you're not going to know where that survivor went down. So you're not going to know specifically where the killer is. So you may end up walking right into the killer, especially if they're a small terror radius killer. You might just end up walking into them for no apparent reason. This is a decent perk. It also makes it harder for the survivors to come get a save. If you slug, which is the common use for this perk, it makes it harder for them to get up without Unbreakable. If they're trying to get a pallet, flashlight, Sabo save, it makes it harder unless they're on comms in a Survive with Friends. So it's a good perk to run if you're trying to make it harder on the survivors getting saved, but ultimately it doesn't have a significant effect. You're probably going to pick them up and hook them anyways, which will then reveal their position. Overwhelming Presence. This is a garbage tier perk. This is a very bad perk to run. What it does is it doubles the item's consumption rate, so it takes 2 seconds instead of 1 second. away from the item whenever they're in your terror radius. The problem with this is there's a giant fucking notification when they're using the item in terror radius. They get it as soon as they start. So you know what they do? They stop using the item. Now, if they can't, for example, if it's a med kit, and they, you know, have to heal, they don't have self-care, well then yeah, this perk can work, but then again, you're better off with something like Franklin's, which is more consistent and applies to everything. Other than that, I'll just not use the item. This was a great way for countering really long-ass toolboxes, but survivors would just stop and start using the generator without the item. Or the toolbox, sorry. This perk really has no value. As soon as the survivor knows you have it, they just stop using items around you. Next we have Predator. And I'm putting this in B tier. Now I said earlier that I would be talking about Bloodhound. I would mention Predator. How Predator is not as good as Bloodhound. The reason for this is that scratch marks, the way it works is that scratch marks will spawn closer together. That is not significant. If they wanted to fix this perk and make this slightly better, they would make it so that scratch marks change color based off of how old they are. So scratch marks stay up for 4 seconds, and every second that a scratch mark was up would be a different color. This would let you accurately track them. As of right now, survivors who run around in a circle around a pallet and then crouch walk away leave a circle of tracks that the killer will continue chasing if they're only doing that. This perk actually does not do anything to help you reduce chase. This perk doesn't do that. This perk is good on killers who can't see scratch marks due to a power. Therefore, when they come in and out of their power, they're able to see how fresh they are because they'll spawn slightly closer together. So they'll be able to track it a little bit easier off of that. It is a decent perk for helping you track, and certain killers will get benefit out of this, like Legion and Spirit. However, that's the only real value of this perk. It is a D tier perk. Sloppy Butcher. This is the last A perk in the game. It is a meta perk in my opinion. It is, in my opinion, the #1 slowdown for healing in the game. It applies off of basic attacks, not your power, and it causes the survivor to get the mangled status effect and the hemorrhage effect, which hemorrhage considerably increases bleeding frequency. This makes them easier to track if you can track off of blood, and it causes them to be mangled. This is a 25% healing slowdown. That mangled effect is effective across all 3 variations. Sloppy 1, 2, and 3. It does not matter. It is solid. Sloppy is the strongest anti-heal in the game because it instantly applies 25% healing regression. You combo Sloppy and Thana, people are not going to be healing on their own. They're going to get somebody else to heal them, and that wastes time. It's the ultimate time staller when it comes to healing. Now, yes, this is countered by a survivor healing to full health, but this right now is the premium slowdown perk in the game for healing. Spirit Fear is a B tier perk. Again, this is the last B tier perk of the game. It is a combo perk in my opinion. The way it works is whenever you break a certain amount of pallets between 2 and 4, 2 at tier 3, the next time you get stunned by a pallet, the entity will instantly break the pallet. You still suffer the stun, but you can run enduring to prevent that. This basically lets you combo pallets in chases. So if a survivor drops 2 pallets on you, you can drop those 2 pallets and then you can tank the next one like a pro. This pairs well with Brutal, so you can break them faster, or it pairs well with Enduring, so you can eat the stun faster and instantly keep chasing them. It's a good chaser perk, and it doesn't require too much setup to set up as well. It's a good perk to run, but the fact that you really need to run this with another perk makes it hard. Certain killers that can break pallets with their power, or that can ignore pallets, like Legion, or Huntress, can also get some value out of this too. The next one we're going to have is Strider. Strider is a tracking perk. Strider is actually a decent tracking perk. It's C tier. It requires a lot of knowledge to know how to use it. Basically, it makes the breathing of injured survivors louder, and the breathing of regular survivors louder. This is an anti-blendette perk, or a I can't track with scratch marks and blood, but I can track with sound very well perk. If you can track with sound, Strider is the best bet. Or if you can't track the other two because of a killer power like Legion or Spirit, then this perk becomes much better. It also counters Iron Will completely if you don't have it at Tier 3. Tier 3 Iron Will is about the only thing that counters Strider. And the fact that while you're regularly injured, or regular breathing is also louder, it also makes it easier to hear other survivors when they're moaning and making noise, like cleansing a totem or falling from a height, which is decent. If they're trying to sneak around you in close range with that, this perk will counter that as well. Realistically, though, it requires a lot of knowledge to know how to use. Surge is a D tier perk in my opinion. You can make a case that Surge is potentially C tier, especially because it is a regression perk on a generator. However, there's two issues. So the way it works is whenever you put a survivor into the dying state with a basic attack, all gens within 32 meters of that explode and regress. Let's talk about the problem with that. First off, you have to put them in the dying state with a basic attack. It does not work off of grabbing them out of a locker or off the gen or pallet or vault. It does not work off of downing them with your power. And it does not work if the survivor goes down to deep wounds, which I've been able to bait out. Also, there are very, very few maps where generators are located within 32 meters of one another. In addition to this, it has a fucking cooldown on it as a big slap in the face. The way it works is the gen will instantly explode and kick the survivor off it and regress by an additional 8%. However, when it says an additional 8%, this is glitch. It does not reduce it by the 10% of a failed skill check. It just explodes to kick them off the generator and regresses it by 8%. This amount is pretty much worthless. Something like Huntress Lullaby or Overcharge gets more value because the additional effect is on top of that 10% of them failing the skill check. So, just failing a skill check does more regression than this perk does. This perk is only really good for kicking a survivor off of a generator or just applying 8% regression to a gen and starting it. That's the key. If a survivor goes down next to a generator, it starts regressing automatically. The downside of that is if you can't run pop with this because then your pop gets lost on the surge instead. This perk is not that valuable. It is a decent gen regression perk if you don't have pop, overcharge, or lullaby, but it's completely outmatched by those perks. Next we have Unnerving Presence. This is an E tier perk. Unnerving Presence is very bad. It makes it so that when the survivor is in your terror radius, they have a 10% greater chance of triggering skill checks. That is pretty much meaningless. You can run Spine Chill and get that effect. And at least that gives you a repair speed bonus and a detection bonus. It, however, does make those skill check zones 60% smaller. The issue with this is that it also gives the survivor a notification when you get the skill check that it's going to be small. And all subsequent skill checks in the terror radius, they know are going to be small. Therefore, once they know, they may be less inclined to heal or sabo in terror radius. Gens you pretty much can't do anything about. But even then, they'll know to pay more attention to their screen. Now this does work on a meme build with like the Doctor or Huntress Lullaby, but that's about it. One killer and one other perk is a very poor choice to fucking run this perk with. And considering it's pretty much mandatory to put those two together, not a great choice. And our last perk is unfortunately also an E garbage tier perk. I wish I was ending this on a much better note, but Zenshin Tactics is our winner chicken dinner here for one of the worst perks in the game. It is essentially windows of opportunity for the killer. Basically, the aura of all pallets, breakable walls, and vault locations are revealed to you within a 24-meter range. Whenever you hit a survivor, it becomes inactive for 30 seconds. It's literally windows of opportunity for the killer. The downside to this is the only value of this is, hey, there's a pallet over there, so you know I need to mind game this. That's literally all it does. You do not need this perk at all. Anyways, I apologize that this video took longer. That is my thoughts on the killer perks as of today, March the 30th, 2020. I hope you all have a good day. If you missed any of this and want to know where a specific perk is somewhere in the video, just rewind it to where approximately you think. They're all in alphabetical order based off of color.